in this conversation, I'm thinking about friends, family members, people I know who have had eating disorders and then get over that and later end up with a substance abuse disorder or substance abuse disorder first. They manage that and then an eating disorder. I mean, my throat is kind of like, oh, because I'm picturing all these people who I love who have gone through this. Feels like a spiral, right? But there's a relationship there. And we're just curious, do you see that they typically go in hand, or is it just a predisposition, or is it that dopamine thing? Like, what can you tell us here?
Yeah, such a good question. And I've been asking the same question for many years and trying to learn more about the co-occurrence and overlap of eating disorders and substance use disorders. The data suggests that it could be anywhere as high as 50% overlap. But I think an important point is the point that we made earlier about disordered eating versus full-blown clinically significant eating disorders. Someone that has a history of addiction has altered neurobiology, right? Which makes them more susceptible to reward-based processes. The brain assigns more value to things that are rewarding and remembers that rewarding substances or behaviors are important for reducing negative affect. Therefore, the brain registers that as a survival promoting behavior. So someone that grew up with a heavy drug addiction or alcohol use disorder, once they get sober, it's very predictable that there's going to be some dysfunctional eating behavior. And that might play out with binge eating, night eating, et cetera. So that's one example of the overlap. But then someone could also make the argument that chronic exposure to highly palatable foods during their childhood is what set them up for addiction-like processes. And that argument is very valid and hasn't been studied. If you think about, this addiction epidemic that we're in, if you think about the growth of highly palatable foods starting in early 1980, and then, living in a world, side note, I'm also very interested in exposure to highly rewarding food during pregnancy and the potential implications for that to program the reward pathways of the offspring. We've seen that in animal models. So as the food environment's changing and there's more susceptibility to addictions, there's a heightened level of stress, trauma, and adversity in the world. And then you bring in all the other addictions with tech and phones. The brain is just now set up for addiction-like processes across the board. People are way more impulsive, have much less attention, et cetera. So, a lot of people that get into eating disorder recovery cross into alcohol or drugs. And, there's certainly a role for stimulants, which can be used for weight suppression in this conversation. So we definitely see, appetite suppressing drugs as well as appetite suppressing medications being abused for weight management purposes. So yes, they cluster and they co-occur. I often find myself very curious about which one comes first. But to our previous points, and I think a major theme of today is that, trauma is certainly an antecedent to both of them. And there are many people that would look at trauma as the real driver of the behavioral health issues, and that the addiction and the eating disorder are just downstream manifestations of the early life trauma.